ISKCON Guru Vrinda Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. So reading from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita, Uniting Two Worlds. The chapter is entitled Indian Unifying ISKCON. While sitting relaxed in his room, Srila Prabhupada had his temporary secretary Dayananda read him some recent mail. One letter was from a temple president having difficulty managing the devotees, and Prabhupada and Dayananda summarized the letter's points. He said Dayananda, that the devotees aren't behaving, and so he's criticizing, but they're not accepting. Simply criticism is not our means. Said Prabhupada, our means is to show by example. Dayananda made a note of it to use in typing Prabhupada's reply. Now Srila Prabhupada, Dayananda continued, he's inquiring about his household life. This is not the business of the Guru, said Prabhupada, how to increase sex life and family life. They are not happy, these Western men and women. They become married, but they are not happy. Therefore, I recommend brahmacharya and sannyas life. Several other devotees were also in the room with Prabhupada, and Jagat Guru, a brahmachari, spoke up. Because they have no training, that's why they have so many problems. Whatever it may be, said Prabhupada, but they are not happy. Therefore, I recommend brahmacharya and sannyas. Srila Prabhupada had already been disturbed by what he saw as a loose husband-wife situation in Vrindavan. Now, hearing this letter from a householder who was improperly inquiring about his family life, he again turned his attention to Vrindavan and asked his GBC for Vrindavan, Gopal Krishna, who had recently arrived in Mayapur. It is not a free hotel for lovemaking, Prabhupada began, even before Gopal Krishna entered the room. Vrindavan is not a joking place. They must be serious for Krishna. I shall give them everything. Don't worry about money, but manage. There is not scarcity of money, there is scarcity of management. So why so many children in the temple? It is not simply a place for husbandless women. Children should always be engaged, so they shouldn't create a disturbance all over. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudidayet Naschapayashu Bhatrishu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatu Tamashloke Bhakti Bhagavati Naistiki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, and unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vasudeva, the author. By regularly hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is gradually destroyed, almost destroyed, and district is established as an irrevocable fact. Thank you. So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, starting chapter 10, and we'll go on to text 2. I'll read the chapter summary. It's entitled The Discussion Between Jada Bharat and Maharaj Rahugana. In this chapter, Bharat Maharaj, now Jada Bharat, was successfully accepted by King Rahugana, the ruler of the states known as Sindhu and Saurira. The king forced Jada Bharat to carry his palanquin and chastised him because he did not carry it properly. A carrier of King Rahugana's palanquin was needed, and to fulfill this need, the chief carriers found Jada Bharat as the most likely person to do the work. He was therefore forced to carry the palanquin. Jada Bharat, however, did not protest this proud order, but humbly accepted the job and carried the palanquin. While carrying it, however, he was very careful to see that he did not step on an ant, and whenever he saw one, he would stop until the ant had passed. Because of this, he could not keep pace with the other carriers. The king within the palanquin became very disturbed and chastised Jada Bharat with filthy language. But Jada Bharat, being completely freed from the bodily conception, did not protest. He proceeded carrying the palanquin. When he continued as before, the king threatened him with punishment, and being threatened by the king, Jada Bharat began to talk. He protested against the filthy language used by the king when the king chastised him, and the king, hearing the instructions of Jada Bharat, was awakened to his real knowledge. When he came to his consciousness, he understood that he had offended a great, learned and saintly person. At that time, he very humbly and respectfully prayed to Jada Bharat. He now wanted to understand the deep meaning of philosophical words used by Jada Bharat, and with great sincerity he begged his pardon. He admitted that if one offends the lotus feet of a pure devotee, he is certainly punished by the trident of Lord Shiva. So, text 1. Sri Sukad Vacha, I'll read it myself, and as they're both prose, and we'll go through the word for word of the second verse and translation. Sri Sukad Vacha, Atas Sindhu Savira Pati Rahuganasya Rajata Ikshumatyas Tate Tat Kula Patina Sipika Baha Purushana Samaye Daiveno Pasadita Sadvija Varaviparabda Eshapiva Yuva Samhan Nango Go Karavat Juram Vodam Alamita Iti Purvavishti Grihitai Sahagrihita Prasabam Atadarha Uvaha Sribikam Sa Mahanubhava. Translation. Shukadeva Goswami continued, My dear king, after this, King Rahugana, ruler of the states known as Sindhu and Saurira, was going to Kapila Ashram. When the king's chief palanquin carriers reached the banks of the river Ikshumati, they needed another carrier. Therefore they began searching for someone, and by chance they came upon Jada Bharat. They considered the fact that Jada Bharat was very young and strong and had firm limbs. Like cows and asses, he was quite fit to carry loads. Thinking in this way, although the great soul Jada Bharat was unfit for such work, they nonetheless unhesitatingly forced him to carry the palanquin. Text 2. Yadahi drija parasyeshu matra valokanam gater Dasamahita Purusha Gatis Tada Vishama Gatam Svavishipikam Rahugana Upadarya Purushan Adivahata Aha He Buddha Sadvatika Mata Kemiti Vishamam Uhyate Yanamiti. Translation. Word for word. Yada, when, he, certainly, Dvijara Varasya of Jadbharat, Ishumatra, the measurement of an arrow, 3 feet ahead. Avaloka Anugate, from moving only after glancing. Na Samahita, not united. Purusha Gati, the movement of the carriers. Tada, at that time. Vishamagatam, becoming uneven. Svashipikam, his own palanquin. Rahugana, King Rahugana. Upadarya, understanding. Purushan, unto the men. Adivahata, who were carrying the palanquin. Aha, said. He, oh. Vodara, carriers of the palanquin. Sadhu Atikramata, please walk evenly so that there will be not to be bouncing. Kim eti, for what reason? Vishamam, uneven. Uhyate, is being carried. Yanam, the palanquin. Iti, thus. Excuse me. Translation. The palanquin, however, was very erratically carried by Jadbharat due to his sense of non-violence. As he stepped forward, he checked before him every 3 feet to see whether he was about to step on ants. Consequently, he could not keep pace with the other carriers. Due to this, the palanquin was shaking, and King Rahugana immediately asked the carriers, "Why are you carrying this palanquin unevenly? Better carry it properly." Purport. Although Jadbharat was forced to carry the palanquin, he did not give up his sympathetic feelings toward the poor ants passing on the road. A devotee of the Lord does not forget his devotional service and other favorable activities, even when he is in the most distressful condition. Jadbharat was a qualified Brahmin, highly elevated in spiritual knowledge, yet he was forced to carry the palanquin. He did not mind this, but while walking on the road, he could not forget his duty to avoid killing even an ant. A Vaishnava is never envious or unnecessarily violent. There were many ants on the path, but Jadbharat took care by looking ahead 3 feet. When the ants were no longer in his way, he would place his foot on the ground. A Vaishnava is always very kind at heart to all living entities. In his Sankhya Yoga, Lord Kapilidev explains, Surida Savdehinam, living entities assume different bodily forms. Those who are not Vaishnavas consider only human society worthy of their sympathy, but Krishna claims to be the supreme father of all life forms. Consequently, the Vaishnava takes care not to annihilate untimely or unnecessarily any life form. All living entities have to fulfill a certain duration for being encaged in a particular type of body. They have to finish the duration allotted a particular body before being promoted or evolved into another body. Killing an animal or any other living being simply places an impediment in the way of his completing his term of imprisonment in a certain body. One should therefore not kill bodies for one's sense gratification, but for this that will implicate one in sinful activity. Again, Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So previously, Jad Bharat was used to, by his stepmother and brothers, to work in the fields, thinking that he was no good for anything else, just to use him or exploit him to their own ends. So Jad Bharat could be saying, well, here we go again, so I'm being pulled in for something else against my will or not with my well, he says how he didn't protest, but he wasn't consulted in any way, whether it was due to whether he's suitable for the job according to his Varna and ashram. But being a pure devotee of the Lord and seeing that it's by his arrangement, again, that he's in this situation, he didn't protest and agreed to their proposal. But he wasn't going to do that at the expense of his own nature or values and principles. So when he was engaged in carrying the palanquin, he would see if there was any ants around before he would step forward. So this must have been, they couldn't have got very far very quickly at that rate, so there was some complaint. And he had nothing to lose either. He wasn't being he wasn't even going to get paid for the job. They just picked him up and forced him, and there you go, sort of thing. So his nature was to not to see the Lord everywhere, so including in the form of these ants. So it says in the Bhagavad Gita, text 29, Sarvabhutastam Atmanan Sarvabhutani Chatmani Ikshate Yoga Yuktatma Savatra Samadarshana. A true yogi observes me in all beings and also sees every being in me. Indeed, the self-realized person sees me, the same Supreme Lord, everywhere. So there's that picture in the Bhagavad Gita of how the Brahmin, he sees there's a super soul effulgent in the being of the elephant, the dog eater, the dog, and the Brahmin. So he didn't want to put any these ants into distress. So there's a story how the two Brahmins were walking across somewhere, and one saw an ant in the water, a scorpion, and wanted to save the scorpion. And he picked it up, and it bit him, and so he shook his hand, and then he picked it up again, just to try and save it, and again it bit him. And this went on for a third time, so his partner was saying, why do you bother? You know, the nature of this scorpion is to bite and sting. And but the Brahmana said, but it's also my nature to try and save the living entity. So therefore, I won't give up on I won't give up my nature, just as the scorpion doesn't want to give up his. So this is the nature of devotee, that he sees his paradukkha dukhi. He sees the suffering of all living entities, and so being compassionate, knowing what it's like to endure such suffering, he's kind and considerate. So we may be put into distressful conditions ourselves, and whatever the situation, it may be Krishna testing us or giving us opportunities, or it may be Maya testing us to see whether we want to serve Krishna or serve Maya or serve our senses. And Krishna says how we can be successful by practice and detachment. So every test is a practice to overcome the influence of material nature, affecting our psychophysical nature. Our psychophysical nature is a combination of the modes of nature. So to be able to remember, to make the endeavour to remember ourselves as spiritual beings, and not this body or the mind or the emotions that go with it, and be able to see Krishna in the situation, to know how to react, or to have the equilibrium of mind to pray to Krishna if we don't know, or if it's not obvious to us what we should do. And in this way, we'll be able to see difficulties as opportunities to take a leap forward in our spiritual advancement. So here, Jad Bharat wasn't going to give up his nature, no matter what the result would be, the consequence of doing so. Even if when the king was becoming angry, he didn't give it up. So in this way, he was pleasing his the pleasure of Krishna was far what his ultimate desire, rather than the satisfying an angry king. So you can imagine that if the king, being a king, no one would dare speak or protest against him. So, and this is the nature of the other palanquin carriers. They were very fearful of him, a fear of punishment, and which could mean a lashing or whatever it may be, they were very fearful of him. So this fear was conspicuous by its absence in Jack Barrett. And he's willing to, as we hear later, that he's, even though he's chastised by the king, he and his response was to speak philosophy to him, to try and enlighten him. And this is in this way he would show his mercy upon the king. So the devotee sees all opportunities to, just as he didn't want to block the ants' involvement in their spiritual involvement. So similarly, he saw his interaction with the king as an opportunity for his spiritual elevation as well. So any comments or questions or at this point?
Duty, regardless, and to a certain degree, devotees generally they're also going to follow in that example. Just because of public opinion, it's not going to stop the devotees from performing their devotional service or living up to the principles. So I just wondering, how do we balance out keeping good public relations and yet still sticking to our principles?
Essentially, I think it's to, for what I've seen, is to make, to publicise, in one sense, the compassion of our movement, in the sense of wanting everybody's welfare at heart, to guide in such a way that we're not, that nobody, to guide and give guidance in such a way that people become aware of how their activities have an effect on others, and so to act in such a way that promotes the compassion for all beings and being good fortune for others. I don't know if that answers your question. Can you give an example?
Well, I just think that, especially in the Western world, there's never really been a better time to be able to live according to what you believe. In some ways, political correctness can be a bit over the top, but in other ways, it allows us to practice our beliefs with protection from the government. So I think the main thing is that we have got a right to practice and believe what we believe in. We just have to do it in such a way as it's we're stating it as our right. We're not putting others down for what they believe in.
Yeah, from what I understand, political correctness, it can highlight, the needs of a particular section of society, but at the same time, it may neglect. It might be at the expense of something else.
So the devotees are not necessarily interested in what's popular.
Yeah.
They want to make a good impression on the public, but they're not going to change their principles according to what the body's like.
Yeah, it's not, devotee doesn't, like Jack Barrett here, he's not going to give up his, he's not going to kill someone just because someone has told him to. The devotee is willing to do anything to, well, there's a story of how a devotee was doing door to door, and he met with these kind of Hell's Angels type people, and I don't think he recognized it at the time, but he went in and they were kind of a whole group of them there, and it looked pretty ominous. And he said what he did, what he's tried to give them the books and so on, and said, why should we believe you, and so on like this. And eventually what they did was to test him, they hung him outside the window and said, are you willing, what do you really believe what's in these books? If we'll just trying to test his faith, and he said, no, I'll never give it up. You can let me drop if you like, but this is my life, my conviction. It's not worth living without this. And he said, okay, what is it to you then? Because he just tested him. So the devotee is willing to go through all sorts to understand that every situation is by Krishna's arrangement. You've seen how movements go underground because the government's been so inimical. And then in the early history of the movement is there. They're willing to die to share this special message to others. It's not that we walk into the situation and say things that upset people. It's, so we have to be intelligent that we don't give knowledge to people that's above their station and preaching to the faithless. But at the same time, we don't give up our principles for the sake of a popular view.
Prabhupada didn't compromise principles, and he even said that if we remain small, we remain small. It's not like we've got loads and loads of people who don't follow the principles. Like, we're not going to compromise, principles. So that we can get lots and lots of people in the society.
Your Prabhupada said quality, not quantity. If you had one pure devotee who's happy, and that's Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati temple. So not so many stars, just give me one moon. So in this way they can do so much more than all those stars put together. So it's just a sign for us to become, do what we can to become the pure devotee, so that we can have that much influence and please our spiritual master to bring so many people to Krishna consciousness.
I had a nice analysis yesterday in a class by Radhika Prabhu, and he was analysing Lord Chaitanya's behaviour in speaking to the Mayavadi sannyasis in Benares, specifically Prakashananda Saraswati. So everything that the Mayavadis stood for at that time was most of the things that the Mayavadis stood for was against the devotees, and they were openly criticising Lord Chaitanya, ridiculing him. and like ridiculing him in public. So they were definitely inimical towards the whole devotee community. Nevertheless, the way Lord Chaitanya interacted with them and the way that he actually finally enabled them to understand their mistake was first of all through his effulgence. That was the first thing. So Radhika Mahaprabhu says this effulgence was the result of the example that he was setting, that effulgence is the result of his adherence to sadhana bhakti. And because of him strictly following the principles of Krishna consciousness, or he was setting that example, then he was so effulgent that everyone felt this person, let's listen to what this person has to say. But then, rather than just going in and rather than just taking advantage of that respect that he had from them, he actually he expressed his willingness to listen to them. So, and also in that and he first of all quoted his relationship with his spiritual master, and he expressed the fact that his spiritual master said he wasn't qualified to discuss Vedanta. And just as when he was with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he just sat and listened to him because he respected him as a very elevated person, a teacher, a great teacher. And then, so that's first thing was like purity, then humility, and then the third thing is like a very, very strong understanding of the philosophical principles which underlie debate. Right? And actually, Radhika Mahaprabhu was saying that Sambandha, Abhidheya and Prayojana is accepted in all schools of philosophy, both theistic and atheistic, all schools of Indian and all branches of philosophy throughout the world. All philosophers understand these three basic principles. So if you can present Krishna consciousness on the basis of the principles that the people you're discussing with, that they accept, then you can present something which they may not agree with, but they'll respect you because you understand the underlying principles of philosophy.
And that because you listen to them first.
Yeah, you listen to them first. But for them, yeah, you listen to them first.
So,
but you don't listen to them if you're not if your sadhana is not very strict, because then you'll be adversely affected by that.
It's just like regarding politics, and the Bhagavad Gita was spoken in a worst case scenario, just on the verge of battle, so many millions of people. So similarly, Lord Chaitanya appeared in the worst case scenario also because it's Muslim rule, isn't it, at that time? Yeah. So the devotees had to be really cautious. When he started his civil disobedience movement, few wanted to come out. But when they were so afraid, but when they saw the numbers getting bigger and Lord Chaitanya so strong and convinced and so on, then they joined him, and it became massive, to the point where the Muslim ruler was scared. So it wasn't that the devotees at that time had to observe some kind of political correctness also. As Prabhu said, the way Lord Chaitanya went through, especially with the most respected people and persons in the society, was through his effulgence coming from his purity, his humility, that he when he went to meet those Mayavadis, he sat where they washed their feet, and didn't put himself, didn't take care where he was sitting. So this kind of took them aback, and then these two things provided an opening where he could preach to them. So by our strict sadhana and cultivation of humility, then Krishna will put us into situations where we can have that opportunity to really affect people in high positions in society. Like you see Radhanath Maharaj, he's been invited to places all over the world to speak to, and his disciples and other devotees, also to CEOs, which are say, and their employees, and they say there's not much difference from the two. They both experience the same problems. People in government, monarchy. So you can see by his effulgence, his purity, and his sound understanding of philosophy that he can inject Krishna consciousness into the hearts of all these personalities. Any other questions? So one thing is that when we have to be careful to take the advantage now that when we do receive instruction, to take advantage of it and hear, because one day we'll be the leaders, the younger members of, will become the older, the seniors. And because there's an etiquette there, so they're not going to be, the faults won't readily be pointed out. So we have to be conscious of now that we take that advantage, take advantage of instruction so that we can become exemplary leaders and to guide others that way, and with respect and etiquette, because it's not easy otherwise. And whatever situation we're in, to always consider be conscious of the personality, how we can encourage them to the next step in their spiritual evolution. In this way, we're helping another living entity in their spiritual life, and we're not committing violence in any way by speaking something that's not relevant, or not speaking something that is relevant, because it's the Taoist violence not to speak words, not to giving the opportunity not to speak words that can elevate a person out of their ignorance. Please consider violence. So I'll stop there. Thank you for your patience. Gratitude, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, ISKCON Guru ki jai,
Jai. Jai.